In the end, a camera never blinks. It simply records. 4 years blurred together, filled with smiles and whispers. She lied to my face every single day, each word like a carefully scripted line, while I played the fool in her theater. The betrayal tasted bitter on my tongue, but clarity became my refuge the moment I found that footage. What I discovered was a reel of truth interwoven with illusion. The video played on loop, my laughter, her deceit, like a haunting melody that stretched across our shared life. Each scene, a ticking clock counting down the days of my trust. I felt confusion shatter into a cold fury. Heartbreak morphed into purpose, unfurling within me like the petals of a dark flower. I replayed the moments as if watching a stranger. Each time the reality struck harder, her eyes wide with feigned affection, words flowing with exquisite control. I realized she hadn't just strayed, she'd been erasing me from the very fabric of our reality. In those silent screams of her betrayal, I understood my power. I wouldn't scream back. I would build my silence like an impenetrable fortress. She craved confrontation, an audience for her chaos. Instead, I would pull away quietly, navigating my newfound clarity. I became an unmoving shadow behind her spotlight, watching her confusion unfold. The drama she fought for unraveled without my resistance. I felt the thrill of reclaiming control, savoring the understanding that my revenge wouldn't pound like thunder. It would whisper like the wind, cutting through the air unseen. I gathered evidence, not for justice, but for leverage. The camera wasn't the only tool in my arsenal. Each log, each password, each misstep became a thread woven into my tapestry of retribution. Her lies would crumble. I'd make sure of that. I reveled in the knowledge that the intricate web of deception she spun would soon catch her, and I would be the silent architect of her undoing. As she showcased curated happiness, I was the hidden observer, witnessing her life slowly erode from within. I didn't act hastily, though. My path was methodical, every step measured, patience one of my sharpest tools. She wanted shock. She got silence. She would not see me coming, but when the time came, she'd feel every truth I laid bare. And I was ready, not with screams of confrontation, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing the camera never blinked. We all were merely players. Now, as the lights dimmed on her stage, I would be the last one watching as her story crumbled. I sat in the dim light of my living room, the glow from the screen flickering across my face like the silent mockery of a past I once cherished. Each playback of that footage felt like a slow dissection, revealing layers of her performance intertwined with my emptied trust. I watched myself smile, bright, genuine, while she wove her web of deceit. I was a marionette, and she had orchestrated each movement for her own spectacle. Those eyes I thought radiant were nothing but gilded lies. With each replay, anger simmered beneath a serene surface. I marveled at the precision of her facade. Every laugh was a cue, every touch choreographed. My heart clenched tightly, grappling with the realization that she didn't just stray from our path. She obliterated it, erasing every moment we shared, redefining my existence in the shadows of her duplicity. I, the unwitting spectator of a carefully crafted show, was no longer visible. As the thoughts crystallized, a glimmer of tranquility emerged from the chaos in my mind. The shock of betrayal molded into a weapon, one that would serve me much better than raw emotion. Silence, I decided, would be my sharpest blade. While she sought conflict and applause, I would harness the power of observation, an invisible hand awaiting its moment. Days turned into weeks as I faded into obscurity. No confrontation, no tears, just distance like a shadow that slipped from view when the sun sank below the horizon. I watched her, keenly observing as confusion bloomed within her, fed by the absence of my response. Her eyes darted for the dramatic flare, but I simply retreated into strategic quietude. Each day my strength grew while her dependency on conflict unraveled, her need for acknowledgement transforming into desperation. And beneath her dazzling veneer, I began to gather fragments of her reality. Not for revenge or justice, but for clarity. I mapped her inconsistencies, uncovering breadcrumbs of deceit embedded in her life. Financial transactions, clandestine messages, each detail peeled back another layer of her falsehood. I felt the scales tip, my hurt morphing into rarefied intelligence. With every revelation, I reclaimed my narrative, reshaped the intimacy she had stolen into a blueprint for her downfall. I became a silent architect, plotting her demise with the precision of a surgeon. The world saw her smile. I witnessed the void behind it. In her continued performance, I found my power, the knowledge that the truth would soon surface, corroding her fabricated identity. And I would remain the still point amidst her chaos. Revenge would not be loud. It would not be a riotous uproar, but a quiet unveiling of reality. A whisper where she had expected thunder. It was time to let the tide of truth sweep her away, and I was prepared to watch that unfold, concealed yet omnipresent. The shadows grew deeper as I allowed myself to dissolve further from her world. Mornings passed, noticing the way she stood, her hands animated in stories that no longer included me. The usual routine dulled under the weight of my silence. I became an echo, fading into the background, strategically crafting my exit while she flaunted her orchestrated joy. Each fake laugh etched in my memory, acting as my compass to guide my plans. No, I wouldn't lash out. There were plenty of swords polished for battle, but I only needed one: stealth. The true art of revenge lay in the careful replication of her chaos, except this time, it would be my hand doing the painting. I flitted between shadows, a mere observer in the artless draping of her lies. As she balanced precariously on the edge of her deception, I learned to adapt, an invisible current waiting to rise. I spent evenings drifting through functionally operatic bars, the dim lighting a cocoon of anonymity as I tapped into my newfound control. Eavesdropping became an art form. "Did you hear about Mark?" one peer would question, spurred entirely by her fabricated relationship. With every thread I pulled on, a deeper layer revealed itself, painting the broader strokes of my counter-narrative. Underneath the gloss, financial cracks lay waiting, irritable debts that fell shy of her bright facade. I scoured every receipt, every bill tied to her plastic smile, embedding them like seeds in my mind to nurture later, when the winds turned. Passwords were harvested quietly, crafted like a master key into her clandestine world, where whispering secrets dwelled amidst mundane texts. By night, I examined her presence on social media, photos meticulously curated, each angle revealing less than she intended. Her last post, filtered to perfection, showcased a life falsely spun, a vacation with friends, while I sat, the ghost haunting the edges of her theatrics. Something thrummed beneath my ribs. I pulled away, step by step, growing heavier in purpose while she floated on the high tide of her self-constructed bliss. I felt her distortion keenly. Manipulative chaos was the only language she understood. She'd been waiting for the inevitable confrontation, the storm of blame and grief to roll in. That wasn't on my agenda. Instead, I savored the art of restraint, like a hunter matching beats with its prey. Nothing about my reply would tremor the earth. It would unfold with the gentle precision of a spider weaving her web, an entrapment so delicate she wouldn't notice until she was ensnared beyond retreat. With each silent choice I made, I solidified my strength, reclaiming the control she stole as the void of her reality slowly unraveled. She wanted shock. She would get silence. Revenge didn't need to shout. It merely needed to exist, an unwavering truth waiting to be unveiled. And as I prepared the pieces on my chessboard, I understood. Her demise would grace the stage that she had built with performances of deceit. I would be the unseen hand that pulled away the curtain, revealing every truth she thought she buried. From the shadows, I would watch and weave, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The camera never blinked, but it was my turn to take center stage. The shadows had condensed into something tangible, a cloak enveloping my purpose. Days turned to nights with metabolic precision, and each tick of the clock echoed softly in my mind. I became the shadow behind her light, the phantom in her flawless tableau. She continued to perform, each laugh a well-practiced note echoing from her lips, while I became acutely aware of her every flaw, a misplaced glance, a hesitation in her laughter. These were the cracks in her guise, and I was ready to exploit them. I watched diligently as she unveiled her curated life to the world, oblivious to the eyes trained on her from the darkness. I straightened my posture, a conductor ready to orchestrate a symphony of calculated chaos. Each piece I gathered was like a bone thrown to a hungry dog, fueling my anticipation. It wasn't vengeance that I sought. It was understanding. Understanding her weaknesses, the chinks in her armor that she thought impervious. I began to stitch her narrative together, hungry to unveil the whole tapestry of deceit she had woven. Financial missteps, clandestine communications, hidden beneath layers of gloss. The first threads came loose when I hacked into her email, passwords that should have remained secrets, carelessly exchanged for convenience. Unknowingly, she handed me access to her public and private lives alike. The flicker of excitement coursed through me, the dance of adrenaline unfurling within my chest. I felt power returning, like an old friend greeting me at a long-awaited reunion. As she pushed her latest facade into the world, a photo of her with friends, I stumbled upon texts that sent ripples of incredulity through me. A text from someone else, a name I didn't recognize. An alias, perhaps. Each message, an entrancing riddle woven from lies. I absorbed these revelations, savoring every morsel of betrayal. Pain morphed into strategy, and every ounce of hurt transformed into the fuel for a brilliant plan. She had built her fantasies upon stolen moments and hollowed promises. Did she remember my quiet nature, my endless patience? I had become a spectator in my own life, an audience watching the curtain rise on her most audacious act yet. But I was no longer merely passive. My days of watching in silence had ended. I was orchestrating the overture of her unraveling, an opus of revelations to come. With each calculated move I made, I reveled in the anticipation, knowing the climax was nearing. The threads began to tighten around her scroll of deceit. For her, it would be an unraveling slow enough to feel like a gentle breeze, yet sharp enough to cut. She wanted shock. She would receive the subtle suffocation of truth. In time, she would turn to find the light she once basked in had faded, replaced by shadows that whispered her own lies back to her. Each bowing of her arrogance would resonate in her mind as the very fabric of her reality began to fray, exposed by the truths I would reveal. And I would remain there, watching as her facade cracked, letting the architect of her downfall remain unseen until the final curtain fell. The camera had never blinked. It merely recorded. And now I would be the one to show her that sometimes the silent observers are the most dangerous of all. As days blurred into weeks, her world continued to spin, oblivious to the force that quietly gathered momentum around it. She thrived publicly, a dazzling butterfly flitting from one social engagement to the next, but behind the vibrant colors lay a threadbare reality. I watched as her laughter, rigged and rehearsed, echoed through crowded rooms, each note sent forth like a siren's call, beckoning attention to her fabricated kingdom that crumbled beneath the surface. There was an emptiness to her joy, a hollowness that whispered of the deception woven intricately into the fabric of her life. I saw her each day, entranced by her own reflection, but utterly unaware of the unseen predator circling just outside her bubble of delusion. In the quiet moments, when the camera was off and the admirers dispersed, the weight of her pretense bore heavily upon her shoulders. The absence of confrontation confused her. She thrived on the chaos generated by public dramas. I had become a ghost, slipping silently through her existence, invisible yet acute in observation. Carefully, I began to lay the groundwork for my silent retribution. Every word, every glance became part of my strategy, meticulously documented like a rising tide determined to drown her illusion. I couldn't afford to act hastily. Every move had to exude the precision of a predator in a calculated hunt. My heart raced not from anger, but from the thrill of planning, crafting my revenge with the tenderness of an artist molding clay into form. I watched her thrall, reaping the fruits of illusion, while I constructed her downfall, brick by deceptive brick, a well-crafted edifice she believed was untouchable. I let her continue in her charade, each curated social media post adding another layer to her public mask. Boisterous outings, apparent friendships, and extravagant vacations. My silence was a canvas, blank yet summoning the imagery of every falsehood she spun with careless abandon. I absorbed it all, cataloging her moments of triumph as if they were smoke, beautiful but ephemeral. Fueled by restraint, I began to plant subtle seeds of truth that gnawed at the edges of her constructed life. A borrowed name here, a whispered secret there. Each fragment was a drawn-out breath in my orchestration, a thread slowly unraveling her tapestry of deceit. I watched her stumble over the cracks that had begun to form beneath her carefully placed facade, and it was intoxicating. The absurdity of it all became clear. She thought she was untouchable, while in reality, her demise had already been written. I merely held the pen. In meetings and conversations, I positioned myself within earshot of acquaintances who wouldn't think twice about filtering information back to her. "Did you hear about the discrepancies in her books?" a colleague would ask, not knowing I was weaving these whispers of doubt into the atmosphere around her. While she laughed and feigned ignorance, I reveled in the irony, cloaked in shadows while she unknowingly danced towards the lit exit of her delusion. As I observed her navigate the mounting tension, the unease that crackled like static in the air, I felt the shifting power dynamic settle comfortably in my grasp. There was an art to patience, an elegance in the simplicity of my unfolding plan. My heart was no longer clouded with the emotions of betrayal, but sharpened by clarity. I began to understand that revenge was not a flood, but rather a slow, deliberate tide, gently wearing down the shores of her arrogance until the truth seeped through the cracks. She had wanted shock. She now lived beneath a silence that suffocated her grandiose plans little by little. With every passing day, I knew I was turning the tide against her. She would soon stand alone, exposed under the harsh light of reality. The trap was laid, and all that was left was to wait, reveling in the knowledge that each heartbeat she felt in the stillness was another reminder that she was not the only player on this stage. Little did she know, the true performance was just beginning, and I was the conductor guiding every note, unseen but ready to unveil the real symphony of truth. The feedback loop of her life continued as I carved the silence deeper. I reveled in her oblivion, in the tendrils of her deception crumbling beneath my observant gaze. Each text I unearthed, each financial misstep I caught, was a pulse of power thumping inside me, a quiet song only I could hear. But like the calm before a storm, I sensed that balance shifting. It began with an innocuous comment from a mutual friend. "She's been acting strange lately. Do you think she's stressed about work?" I shrugged it off at first, an echo merely reflecting the chaos I had orchestrated. Yet, a nagging unease crept in. Was someone else watching her as I so meticulously did? Days passed, each one blurring into the next. I monitored her interactions, the subtle shifts in her posture, the forced laughter. But today, her smile held an unfamiliar tremor, a tell I hadn't prepared for. As I leaned against the wall of the coffee shop, scouring through notes on her vulnerabilities, my heart sank. She was speaking with a colleague I hadn't counted on, one who had the authority to investigate the very inconsistencies I had planted. With the weight of that knowledge, my mind recalibrated. Precision, I reminded myself. Control, not chaos. I adjusted my approach, allowing the shadow of my thoughts to settle into a steady vice grip. If someone had noticed her struggles, it could jeopardize everything I had meticulously crafted. The game was now a matter of survival, with layers folding into layers, an unfolding narrative I had the power to rewrite. As I veered toward my exit, I caught a glimpse of her in the cafe. She was animated, engaged, but behind her laughter lurked anxiety, an undercurrent destabilizing her performance. I could almost hear the clock ticking down to the unveiling of her lies. I observed the way she shifted, constantly checking her phone, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. The trap I had laid was inching toward a collapse, and that would not do. Suddenly, the thought ignited, a spark of clarity in the dark fog. I had the upper hand, and I would not let this opportunity slip away. Swiftly, I retrieved the documents I'd distilled from her life, the evidence I had gathered so carefully. I imagined presenting it not to destroy her, but to amplify my purpose, to drive her deeper into uncertainty. In that moment, I made the decision. I would tip her colleague off, not fully, just enough to rattle her, to tighten the noose without overly exposing myself. A whisper in the right ears, scattered breadcrumbs leading back to her. It was the sharpened knife, ready to slice through the threads of her tapestry, all the while keeping my own hands clean. The satisfaction I felt curled like smoke within me. I typed the anonymous email with deliberate calm, detailing the inconsistencies I'd discovered, subtle, almost innocuous, just enough to crack the porcelain of her carefully sculpted image. The shadows shifted in my favor, and as I sent the email, a thrill of control rushed through me. I pictured her reaction, confusion slowly torn apart by the hints of truth. She wouldn't see me. I would remain concealed, a phantom in the background. As I dismissed the cascading doubts that threatened my composure, I understood this was not merely revenge. It was recalibration. This chapter in her life would turn towards disarray, a balancing act she could no longer maintain. Each fall would echo in the silence I controlled, every misstep a testament to the truths I owned. As the email vanished into the ether, I leaned back in my chair. I took a breath, savoring the weight of determination pooling in my gut. No panic, no fear. Just a cold precision guiding my every move. I had become the architect of her downfall. The camera may never blink, but I was ready to ensure she felt every frame I captured, every truth I revealed, one perfectly executed movement at a time. The room was shrouded in shadows as I prepared my final act. The moments ahead were wrought with the kind of silence that crackled with electricity, charged with the anticipation of revelations yet to unfold. My heart beat not with anger, but with a calm clarity, the way still waters mirror a stormy sky, a contrast inconceivable yet undeniably present. Tonight, everything would change. As I sat in the muted glow of the screen, clutching the USB drive that held 4 years of her deceit, I allowed myself to savor this moment. Each frame had been meticulously crafted, a memory transformed into tangible proof. The reality of her betrayal remained encapsulated within those pixels, ready to weave its way back into her life, like a ghost resurfacing from an unquiet grave. I recalled each instance I had recorded without intention, the laughter, the light in her eyes, the fleeting moments that once felt genuine but were now rendered hollow. It was a script she performed with astonishing skill, and I had unwittingly become her unwelcome audience. But tonight, she would witness not just the performance, but the unraveling of her carefully constructed facade. No words accompanied the USB, no threats. Just the raw, undeniable transparency of years condensed into a single file, unadorned and stripped of any emotional embellishment. I pictured her fingers trembling as they grasped it, her gaze flickering from the device to the computer screen. The truth beckoned, seductive yet terrifying, promising clarity where confusion reigned. I dispatched the drive anonymously, sealing it away in the void of cyberspace. Each keystroke echoed like a gust of wind brushing through barren trees, whispering secrets to no one but myself. I didn't need to witness her reaction. The knowledge that she would see it, the realization hitting her like a swift blow to the gut, was enough. Her denial would crumble under the weight of truth, and I relished in the anticipation of watching her crumble. As I sat back, waiting for the inevitable wave of her disintegration, I felt my own power swell. I had slipped through the cracks of her chaos, navigating a landscape of deception with the elegance of a phantom. She had sought recognition, applause, and spectacular drama, yet she was about to be served an entirely different performance, one where I was the unseen conductor, orchestrating a symphony of her own undoing. The air in the room thickened, charged and almost tangible as I envisioned her, her brows furrowing, mouth agape, as the reality of who she truly was flashed before her eyes. In that moment, I would be the architect revealing the blueprint of her own design, exposing her vulnerabilities until she found herself laid bare against the very truths she had fought so hard to bury. Silence wrapped around me like an armor. Each breath I took felt deliberate, essential, no longer a victimized performer in her tragicomedy, but the harbinger of consequences she could no longer escape. I had turned her narrative against her, weaving her lies into her downfall like a masterful weaver crafting a tapestry that would soon collapse under its own weight. She had played her part for too long, believing the spotlight to be her own. Little did she know, the camera never blinked, and now it was time for the curtain to rise on her grand finale. As the action unfolded in my mind, I felt a sense of purpose settle within me. I was no longer dominated by chaos or wounded pride. I had recalibrated, redefined the rules of our game, and emerged inexplicably stronger. In the quiet of my solitude, I found solace. The echoes of revenge reverberated not in shouts or screams, but in the profound control I had suddenly regained. She wanted confrontation. She would receive revelation. With every tick of the clock, I understood that mastery lay not in vengeance, but in the art of timing, the deft handling of shadows that would soon engulf her entirely. The final act was upon us, and I felt no fear or trepidation, only the thrill of impending liberation. I had become the architect not just of her reality, but of my own. For every lie she told, I held her truth, ready to unfurl like a dark flag on the battleground of our shared history. The camera never blinked. I had simply captured everything she tried to erase, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. Her world began to crack, fissures appearing in the carefully constructed artifice she had crafted over 4 long years. I noticed it first in the minutiae, the way her laughter faded just a bit too soon, replaced by a faltering smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The chatter amongst her friends turned into whispers I could not hear but felt, like the faint hum of distant thunder before a storm. She had spun a beautiful web, but I had watched intently enough to see the threads growing taut, ready to snap. Each tweet and Instagram post she published felt increasingly hollow. I could almost see the confusion in her eyes when the likes faltered and the comments became scarce. The fever of adoration she'd basked in, now a distant echo. It was almost poetic, watching the energy in her smile dwindle even as she pretended to shine brighter. She had always marveled in the spotlight. The absence of an audience now sent ripples of unease through her carefully rehearsed performance. The curtain was lifting, and she had no clue what lay beyond. And there I stood, obscured by shadows of my own making, reveling in her turmoil while she flailed against an invisible current. Every attempt to reach out for comfort, to claw back the harmony she once commanded, only deepened her solitude. A few stray texts slipped through the cracks of her sudden introspection, panicked pleas directed toward me, calls for validation I would no longer provide. I remained resolute in my silence, a ghost haunting the memories of someone she'd thought she knew. You don't need to scream when you've already won, I reminded myself as I observed. My detachment was an evolution, a deliberate unraveling of emotional ties I once clung to like a lifeline. She wanted conflict. I offered her an echo of solitude. As she meandered through her thinning social circle, glancing nervously at her phone, the pressure mounted within her like storm clouds heavy with rain. Her every misstep danced in the air as I counted the moments, tension hanging like the haze just before a storm breaks. Clarity sharpened with each day that passed, her panic becoming palpable, a scent I feasted on. I entertained the thought of her spiraling, tethered to the weight of her lies. Soon, her carefully curated existence would collapse around her, and I would be the unseen hand ensuring her descent was both graceful and absolute. Conversations I'd once dreamt of exchanging, the hurt, the betrayal, had transformed into a silent journey I was orchestrating masterfully. I am not merely a spectator in my own story. I had become the puppet master, strings pulled taut in calculated silence. She had broken the mirror, but instead of shattering, I polished it until I could see everything through its reflection. Then, the unexpected strike came. I caught her speaking to him, her colleague, the one with influence, authority. A cautious smile fluttered across her lips, a lifeline she sought to grasp amidst the chaos. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of jealousy, quickly extinguished by a wave of power washing over me. She was reaching for familiarity, yet I had engineered this moment. The worries of whispers had become reality. Watching her through the cafe window, I could see her desperate attempts to manipulate the conversation, to project confidence to a friend who was no longer a refuge. Every amicable word she uttered was wrapped in desperation, a lifeline anchored not in reality, but in desperation's desperate grasp. It was time to tighten the noose further. I envisioned the quiet but steady fallout, the emails I'd dispatched, a careful understanding that each would come back to her like echoes in an empty hall. My fingers danced over keys, crafting a narrative devoid of urgency yet dripping with implications. I tipped her friend off in a half-parody of concern, crafting the details to insinuate suspicion, piling rumbles on an already trembling foundation. The storm was brewing, and with it drifted an intoxicating thrill. This was the delicate art of power. I knew she would soon feel the pressure, an unbearable weight that would tip her into panic. The facade she maintained would soon splinter, and as every fear she harbored began to surface, I would exist as both witness and orchestrator of her unraveling. She craved the light, but would soon find herself swallowed by darkness. I could almost hear the clock ticking as she spun deeper into her web, a predator poised to strike, waiting for the perfect moment to sink into her reality. Let her think she has the upper hand while I remain concealed, manipulating the strings. That's the nature of this dance. I wouldn't have to shout. I would merely observe, waiting for her to turn around and, in her reflection, see exactly who she'd become. An empty shell of the person who once laughed in the warmth of the sun, now a frigid silhouette shadowed in the dark. The camera had caught it all. Now it was time for her to realize just how devastatingly effective silence could be. I stood on the precipice of the inevitable, my heart a metronome ticking down the seconds until her carefully woven life would unravel into threads of chaos. The pieces clicked into place like the final notes of a symphony, one I had composed in silence while she clung to the spotlight, utterly unaware of the cyclone swirling around her. I could feel the weight of stillness in the air, a pregnant pause before the storm, a symphony of her failures ready to burst forth. With her laughter fading and her confidence slipping, I recognized the signs of desperation etched across her once bright facade. Each forced smile was a flicker of the flame rapidly extinguishing, and I watched, a detached observer, savoring the realization that she was out of control. She was wedged in her own web of deceit, all while I orchestrated the pulling of threads, waiting for her to feel that gentle tug that would unravel everything she held dear. Lives often fell apart before anyone noticed. Here, all the chaos breathed life into my plan. I felt like a sniper patiently resting the crosshairs on a target, ready to hold my breath and take the shot. No haste, no noise, just the focused calm of destiny aligned with every calculated moment. She craved confrontation. I reveled in the calm before the strike. Silence had always been my greatest weapon, and in this endeavor, it became an impenetrable shield. I remembered the words of a friend echoing in my mind. You don't need to scream when you've already won. My voice filtered through my thoughts, but here my silence spoke volumes. I tucked the evidence beneath layers of anonymity, layering my approach like the skill of a thief converting their axe to an art form, moving through shadows unfelt. The euphoria of control flowed through me, each click of the keyboard an affirmation of power. Then came my final maneuver, the gentle nudge towards her colleague, igniting the spark that would lead to the conflagration of her reality. I had sent the message, a whisper scattering through the air, planting seeds of doubt that would sprout in the fertile soil of her paranoia. I could almost visualize her reading those impersonal lines, heart pounding as the dissonance hit her. Lies became palpable truths, and confusion spiraled into a frenzy of unraveling ties. Behind the scenes, the curtain would soon rise. I watched her, eyes sharp, like a hawk circling its prey, as she navigated the conversations with her ally, a trembling mask painted on her face. Each laugh, every subtle shift in her voice, would only serve to deepen her burden, a heavy weight she had forged with her own hands. I imagined her heart racing, nerves fraying, a time bomb counting down without her knowledge. With all the threads taut and the stage set, I understood one undeniable truth. She was never truly in control. The moment that realization washed over her, every lie she had so meticulously concocted would turn on her like a rabid dog, biting the hand that once fed it. I would remain a phantom, an unseen architect of her downfall, savoring my victory not with triumph, but with a cold detachment that echoed every beat of her impending collapse. And as the cogs turned in the machinery of her despair, I closed my eyes, inhaling the quiet tension in the air. The die was cast. I was ready to let her face the truths she thought she could keep buried. In this silence, I had crafted my masterpiece. A tap of the keys would send it spiraling forward, a revelation that would uncover the wreckage of her existence, layered, intricate, and painfully real. Soon, she would look in the mirror and see the reflection not of the woman she had pretended to be, but of a hollow illusion, fast approaching the precipice of her reckoning. I relished that final breath before justice landed. It was no longer about revenge, but about the exquisite satisfaction of truth reclaiming its rightful place. The USB arrived in her mailbox, a nondescript package hidden beneath the mundane. Inside, the memories of betrayal festered, captured in frames like a morbid gallery of our past, years distilled into digital silence. I could only imagine her hands trembling as she unwrapped it, shadows of dread shadowing her naive curiosity. Each flicker of the light from her screen would reveal the truth to her, a truth she had so desperately concealed. As she sat there, heart racing and pulse quickening, she wouldn't know that I was miles away, a silent observer, savoring the moment before the dam broke. I could see it in my mind, the slow realization creeping across her face, the veneer of confidence cracking as it had under the weight of her deceit. She wanted an audience for her chaos. Instead, she would face the performance of her own undoing, one I had orchestrated with meticulous care. All those nights spent gathering evidence, piecing together fragments of her elaborate charade, had led to this. No threats, no confrontation, just the stark clarity of truth surfacing in stark contrast to her lies. The camera never blinked, but now she faced the consequences of the years she thought she had erased. A silent gloat unfurled within me as I pictured her watching the footage. The laughter we shared, layered with her smirks that belied 1,000 plans crafted in shadows. Each word from her mouth had been a lie, each gesture rehearsed for my benefit. But I was no longer the fool tending to her every whim. I had become the architect of her demise, reveling in every moment that brought her anxiety to life. I envisioned her eyes widening in horror, confusion dancing within as the tapestry of her perfect world unraveled thread by thread, the fabric of her life torn by the very truths she thought she'd buried under layers of deceit. As the images flickered, I pictured her face falling, the glamour stripped away like paper in a fire. I could almost hear the gasps for breath she would stifle, murmurs of disbelief rising from her lips as she replayed the very moments when she thought she had me fooled. The pulse of recognition would hit her, as the weight of my silence transformed into a cacophonic roar of realization. She craved shock, an explosion of drama, yet I gifted her quiet devastation. The revelations would bloom around her, suffocating with the weight of consequence that had come full circle. A raw echo of self-awareness reverberated in my core. She was collapsing under the pressure of her own making, each thread of her facade fraying, tangled in the web she had so skillfully woven. In that moment, she would reflect, no longer the imperious queen basking in an audience's adoration. Instead, she faced the mirror of her own deceptive nature, observing her reflection distorted by guilt and panic. Behind those once enchanting eyes lay the remnants of lies meticulously crafted, and I reveled in the dark satisfaction of knowing I was the ghost haunting her. None of it required me to raise my voice or to confront her directly. No dramatic showdown or final revelation needed to be spoken. The silence was my sharpest weapon, echoing louder than any confrontation could ever achieve. Her house of cards had crumbled, leaving her exposed to the world, a masterpiece of manipulation, now rendered a tragic farce. As the day turned to night, I sensed her world tilting. Friends distanced themselves, rumors danced on the air, swirling relentlessly, tarnishing her gilded image. She would remember how she had spun her life into a performance, reveling in it until the lies took on a life of their own, demanding control. Only now was she learning the true cost of deception, a lesson steeped in the bitter tears of regret. And for all the turmoil, all her scrambling to salvage what remained, I found clarity in the weightlessness of my detachment. I never needed to ruin her. I simply allowed her to fall, a force unyielding in her while I remained the watchful one. In the stillness, the power shifting like sand beneath her feet, I watched as she eroded, one moment of silence at a time. Each revelation she faced became a beat marking the demise of the person she had deceitfully crafted. It wasn't an explosion. It was a suffocating realization that enveloped her, the unraveling of a carefully crafted illusion without any real drama. You see, the truth does not scream. It resonates in quiet desperation. It rolls softly over the chaos she thought she controlled. As I surveyed this bitter symphony unfolding before me, satisfaction settled in, not in triumph, but in the clarity of my own narrative restored. I had risen untouched from the ashes of her fire, no longer a casualty of her deception, but a sovereign of my own existence. And that was the beauty of it. She shattered the mirror, and all I ever wanted was to polish it. I stepped out into the soft embrace of twilight, the world around me draped in hues of muted blues and grays. With every step down that empty road, the weight of 4 years lifted, evaporating into the distant hum of the city behind me. The chaos once tangled in my heart had dissolved, replaced by clarity, a quiet victory that sang in the stillness of my solitude. I looked back only once, a fleeting glance at the house that stood as a monument to the life we had built, a life riddled with deception. It was an unfamiliar sight now, painted faintly in the fading light. I felt nothing, as if I had pressed my palm against a mirror, reflecting back memories that no longer held their vibrancy. The laughter we shared, the sweet whispers like moths fluttering around the flame, now carried the faintest echo of betrayal. You don't need to scream when you've already won, I reminded myself, a mantra grounding me in this newfound calm. The breath I exhaled lingered in the air, a puff of smoke dissipating, much like the remnants of her existence in my life. She had wanted shock. She had received silence. And in that quietness, wrapped snugly within my heart, I had found transformation. Walking away felt less like an escape and more like a rebirth. I had shed the skin of hurt, anger, and hopelessness that had clung to me for so long. Each footfall was a step into a future no longer defined by her narrative but mine, a canvas blank and waiting, ready to be infused with authenticity. A few weeks of silence had passed since her world fissured under the weight of untruths, and I had finished what I needed to do. The USB drive filled with memories remained positioned on an anonymous shelf, its purpose fulfilled in the realm of confrontation I had never wanted. I pitied her, not for her loss, but for her ignorance. She was the architect of her demise, blind to the truth that slowly unraveled before her eyes. In watching her fall, I realized I had woven my own redemption. I had, after all that was said and undone, become the man who watched, not forever haunted by shadows, but liberated by them. As I moved further down the street, I felt empowered by my silence. There was no need to revisit the wounds. I had polished the mirror she shattered, examining each shard until it reflected the man I chose to be, scarred but resolute. I found a bench overlooking a serene park, one where the night promised solace. I sat, allowing the gentle breeze to dance around me, carrying whispers of forgotten memories. My hand cradled a notepad filled with unsaid words, an account of my journey, my feelings. Yet I had no intention of revealing it to anyone. This was a catharsis for myself, a testament of personal strength, one that bore witness to a past that no longer dictated my future. I wrote not to commemorate the time spent tangled in her lies, but to release every heavy thread that connected us. It was one last purge, a cleansing of a narrative that no longer needed to be told or retold. I could burn the pages or keep them locked away. It hardly mattered. The act of writing allowed me to reclaim my voice. Closing the notebook, I looked upwards and saw the stars begin to blink into life. They shimmered like the distant promises that had lain dormant in my heart, waiting to be breathed into existence. I was free. In surrendering to truth, I was stronger than ever, not chasing vengeance, but embracing serenity. The winding path ahead gleamed, stretching into infinity, molded by my choices. I had walked through the valley of betrayal and emerged into the expansive horizon of tomorrow. Closure isn't vengeance. True power lies in rising untouched and moving forward. I would not return to the wreckage I left behind, but carry the lessons with me, inscribed in quiet strength. With one final exhale, I stood from the bench, leaving behind the weight of a past laden with deceit. I stepped forward into the night, no longer a man defined by lies, but one who had outgrown the need for them entirely. Each step sang softly, a promise unfurling into an untamed expanse, where my journey truly began anew.